Hey bro, how much can you deadlift?
If that's a question somebody asked you in the gym and you weren't very comfortable in giving out your answer, then don't worry. This video is for you. At first, when I started, I wasn't really good at deadlifts either. I was barely able to deadlift 100 kilos. But years later, because I worked a lot on my technique and the powerlifting program, I was able to overcome that. In June 2023, during the Powerlifting World Championship, I was able to deadlift 285 kilos at 66 kilo body weight. In pounds, that's roughly 630 pounds for a 145 pounds of body weight. And today, I'm going to break down the technique that I use in order to deadlift like that, so you can use that technique in your own training and make some serious deadlift gains. So let's start with the basic. One of the key points for a good deadlift is technique. At the end of the day, you can be over a bar, deadlift whatever, but you won't be able to make some very good gains. And also, if you do make some gains, you're at a very high risk of injury. And obviously, if you're injured half of the year, then you won't be able to make really good gains on your deadlifts. And if that can reassure some of you guys, when I started out, I didn't know how to deadlift either. Like you can see on this video, I was able to deadlift 170 kilos, which is not too bad, I would say. But if you look at the technique that I was using, I wasn't really using a good technique. And because of that, like I said, I wasn't really able to have a very good programming, because most of the time I was injured, my back was hurting, and I developed a hate-love relationship with deadlifts. When I had a good deadlift session, that was cool, but whenever it was getting rough, then my technique was all over the place, my back was hurt, and I wasn't really able to train deadlifts with a lot of consistency. So to break it down very simply, the deadlift is simply two things: one, a pull, and two, a push. So we'll go over those two key elements, and I'll give you all of my techniques and all of my tools that I use to improve on both of those. First, with the pull. One of the biggest beginner mistake you'll see on the deadlift fails video is the guys deadlifting aren't really able to pull onto the bar. How do you see it? You see it because between the moment they start pulling and the moment the bar breaks the floor, you can see a crazy shift in their position, crazy shift in their back also positioning, and that usually means they're not really pulling efficiently on the bar. That's why in order to have a good deadlift, whether it's technique but also strength and also injury prevention, you need to be able to pull properly the bar. And in the powerlifting world, that's what we call pulling the slack out of the bar. So that's a bit fancy, but at the end of the day, it's just pulling onto the bar. So how do you pull the bar? Basically, what you want to do is you want to be above the bar. Once you're in that position, you want to straighten your arms as much as possible, because having your arms straight will prevent two things. First, it will prevent biceps injury. As you can see in some deadlift videos, some athletes have some bicep tear. One of the main reasons as to why is because they have some sort of flex in their elbows, and obviously if you have your elbows flexed, it means that your biceps are really well engaged in the movement. Sorry to break it down to you, but your biceps aren't made to have a 250 kilo bar at the end. So obviously that's what you have sometimes some bicep tear when deadlifting. So in order to prevent that from happening, you just have to straighten your arm. And if you do so, you prevent 99.9% of your bicep tear injury on deadlifts. And at the same time, having your arm straight will allow you to not row the bar. Obviously the barbell row is a good exercise for back development, back strength, but at the same time, it's not the deadlift. Usually you're able to deadlift way more than you can row, and that's one of the main reasons why. So instead of having your arms flexed at the beginning, you really want to have your arms as straight as possible, and that will allow for a good back engagement into the movement. So you're on top of the bar, your arms are straight. Now what you'll do is you'll hinge at the beginning of the movement. Don't worry about the hinge, that will be actually the second point of the video, so just keep it in mind for right now. You just want to hinge at the beginning and have your arms straight above you. Once you're in that position, you want to bring the bar close to you, and by bringing the bar close to you, what you want to do is imagine you're closing the distance, closing the gap between your arms, your tricep, and your lats. So basically you're closing your armpits. With this position, you've now successfully engaged your back at the beginning of your deadlift. And now in that position, you just want to pull for the bar to break the floor. One cue that you could use is imagine you want to twist the bar, you want to break the bar, and at the same time, you want to, remember, keep your arms straight. And if you do so properly, you should be able to break the floor with the bar. If you add all of the elements we just saw, so you're on top of the bar with your arms straight, then you bring the bar close to you and you close the gap, you close the distance. If you do all of that successfully and you pull on the bar, then you should be able to break the floor with the bar. At this moment, if that happens and that's successful, then congratulations, you've just pulled the slack out of the bar. Now, if I take my own personal example, let's say I have a 70 kilo or 120 kilo deadlift on the bar. If I just engage my back and if I just pull the slack out of the bar, it should come off the floor because that's very, very light for me right now. But the heavier I go, then it won't happen at some point. With 200 kilos, if I just simply engage my back, the bar won't probably leave the floor. So having to have the bar leave the floor when you pull the slack is not the only way you're making sure you're pulling the slack. There are 3 hints that you can use in order to make sure that you're properly pulling on the bar. Number 1 is you should be able to hear a small clinging noise, and that's usually one sign that you're pulling the slack out of the bar because it comes straight. Second thing is you see some sort of slight bend into the bar. Be careful with that because if you're in a commercial gym or you use a deadlift bar, then obviously you'll see a lot of bending. But if, like me, you're deadlifting on a competition powerlifting bar like an Helico bar, then the bar won't bend a lot. You should see some slight bending, but don't expect to see a huge amount of bending. That bending won't happen only if you're using a deadlift bar or commercial gym bar with a lot of weight. Number 3 is if you're able to have a consistency in your starting position. Basically, you start to pull in a position, and when the bar breaks the floor, you're in the pretty much same position with your torso angle and back position. If when you start pulling, you have one of those 3 hints, you're not forced to have 2 of them or 3 of them, it's just one of them. It usually means you're successful at pulling the slack out of the bar. So basically, if I take my example, I don't hear the cling because maybe I have some music in my ears. I don't see a lot of bending in the bar because I usually deadlift with a powerlifting Helico competition bar, which doesn't bend a lot. Then I just have to check my overall positioning. At the beginning of my deadlift, if I pull onto the bar and by the time the bar breaks the floor, my back is in the same position, then it means I'm successfully pulling the slack out of the bar. So if you're not able to have one of those 3 hints, what it usually means is you have to re-go over that slack pull. So basically what you want to do from there is take a very, very light weight, a weight you can just, break the bar by simply engaging your back and pulling the slack. What you want to do is you want to do repetitions over repetitions in order to make sure every time you engage your back, every time you pull the slack, the bar comes off the ground. And then once you've done that successfully for a number of reps, a number of sets, a number of sessions, you want to increase slowly the weight on the bar. And if you do that correctly, then the starting position of the deadlift should be very smooth. Obviously, technique is something very important to be able to make good gains on the deadlift and also on the other movements such as your squat and your bench press. But one other key factor is obviously programming. And I have a lot of programming videos to come, but at the same time, I already have my training program app. And so in the next future, I will do videos on how to program in order to gain strength. But in the meanwhile, if you're interested in following one of my programs that I use in order to be able to become an IPF powerlifting world champion and coach other athletes to reach the same goal, then go to thepanache.app, and on this website, you'll be able to find my training program app where I have over 15 programs available right now. So with one monthly subscription, you'll get an unlimited access to all of my programs. And if you want to take your training to the next level, then I'll meet you there. Now, on to the second point, which is the engagement of the hips. There's one key element you absolutely need to understand is if you're not able to engage your hips in a deadlift, you won't be able to deadlift a lot of weight. The reason is because one of the main actions in the deadlift is a hip extension. So basically, if you're not using your hip on a hip extension movement, then you won't be able to produce a lot of force. In order to use properly your hips on a deadlift, you need to master what we call the hinge. One of the best ways to understand how to do a proper hinge is by doing what we call a wall touch. Basically, start a couple of centimeters off of a wall, usually 1 foot distance. From there, you want to slightly bend your knees and imagine there is a line separating your body in 2 parts. One part from the hip and above, and one part from the hip and below. Then, while maintaining your back neutral, you want to bend your torso over, while at the same time reaching for the wall with your butt. If performed correctly, you should feel a lot of tension in your posterior chain, so basically your glutes and your hamstrings. And that's how you learn the basics of the hinge. Now let's review one example of a deadlift fail where you can see there's a huge difference in hip positioning compared to what I just showed you. On a lot of deadlift fails, what you'll usually see is an improper engagement of the hips. And like I said, the problem is because a deadlift is mostly a hip hinge movement, if you're not able to hinge properly, you won't be able to deadlift a lot of weights. And if you do so, then it puts a big risk on your low back, because whenever your hips aren't involved in the movement, then it becomes way harder for your low back. You have way more stress on your low back, and that can obviously lead to some injuries related to low back. Learning how to engage your hips by touching a wall is something. Learning to engage your hips with a 200 kilo bar on the floor is something completely different. So right now, I'm going to give you one exercise that I really like to use, especially on beginners, in order to make sure they're able to engage, to hinge properly, but also able to transfer that over to an actual deadlift. Grab a pair of very, very light dumbbell, like 10 kilos, 20 pounds, that's pretty much the same. Set that pair of dumbbells over the deadlift platform with a very, very light barbell next to you. From there, what you want to do is you want to perform an RDL, so Romanian deadlift, with the pair of dumbbells. So just the same, imagine there's a wall behind you, you slightly bend your knees and you just want your glutes, your butt to go towards the wall, and you bend your torso angle, and then when you feel you are at the end of your stretch, just come back up. You want to perform 5 reps with that. Good tempo, good eccentric, good concentric. Maintain your back positioning and you should be able to really feel your posterior chain activate. At the end of the 5th rep, when you lower the dumbbells, you want to maintain this position and immediately switch to the barbell. The goal is to use your body's understanding of the hinge with the dumbbells and transfer that over to the barbell pretty much immediately from one rep to the other. And from there, you want to perform 5 reps with your deadlift. Like I said, very, very lightweight, like 40 kilos, 50 kilos, 60 kilos, something that's very, very light. And the whole point of that exercise, so basically that superset RDL's deadlift, is to simply do a lot of good hinging, having a lot of reps where you properly engage your hips and making sure that becomes just second nature to you. And if you're able to have a proper engagement of your hips in the deadlift, you should be able to feel a huge difference. Basically, the deadlift should feel amazing. You should feel a lot of tension, a lot of good stress, a lot of good stretch in your posterior chain, and your low back should be pretty much fine. Like basically whenever I deadlift, I don't feel my low back completely fried the next day or the day after. Now, we've just seen how to engage your back, how to pull the slack. We've just seen how to basically engage your hips, which like I said, is like the powerhouse, the main contribution to your deadlift. And now what you want to do is you want to have a proper timing between those two aspects. You don't want to pull the slack when you're not pushing with your legs, so basically engaging your hips, and then at the same time you don't want to use all of your hip involvement if you're not pulling onto the bar. So usually what I like to do is first create some sort of tension in my posterior chain when I set up, like I said, because the hips is like one of the main contributors to your deadlift. And before I push into the ground, before I go 100% with my hips, I want to initiate the pull. So like I said, I pull the slack out of the bar, I engage my back, and then almost at the same time, like with a 0.1 second difference, I really want to have both of those aspects at 100% of my strength capacity. So don't start by just pulling the slack, don't start by just pushing into the ground. You want to have a combination of both that happen at 100% at the same time. And if you're able to do that, then you'll be able to have a very strong and repeatable deadlift, while at the same time also reducing the risk of injury. So that's pretty much how I do it. That's pretty much how I deadlift. And like I said, using this simple technique, I was able to deadlift over 4 times my body weight in competition at 66 kilos. So if you work on those aspects, if you work on your technique, your deadlift should also be able to skyrocket. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Like I already said it, that's the beginning of my YouTube English channel. That's a lot of work because, as you guys might know, I'm French. So having to do all of those videos in English is quite challenging, but you know, hey, I like to challenge. So if you like this video, if you find it helpful, just let me know. And that's pretty much it for me today. We have a lot more work to do, a lot more of videos to come, and also a lot more of deadlifts. So guys, that was it for me. Train hard, deadlift heavy, and catch you up in the next one.